once a day when a Nintendo seal of approval was much sought after by almost every video game developer. With the success of the NES and the Super Nintendo, it was of utmost importance to get your game on a Nintendo console. But Nintendo didn't make it easy. Well, at least not if you wanted to release a game in North America. The NES was marketed as a toy to the American audience, and Nintendo was adamant to keep it a toy. The rules were stringent, but the rewards could be pretty awesome. So many games were altered to meet these requirements. Some more than others, and both Japanese and American games. There's supposedly 10 guidelines that every game had to follow for release on the American market. Some guy said he found them at his local library. But through examination of a collection of the altered video games, I think they can be simplified into 4 rules. Rule 1. All characters, creatures, and background objects are celibate, never nudes. If you've played Mother 2, you'd know that Ness has a latent nudist side. But in the North American release, Earthbound, Ness more modestly enjoys his pajamas. But there aren't too many instances of naked protagonists. Instead, we have a lot more naked statues that need covering up. There were a couple of enemies who were also required to adjust their wardrobe for the more sensitive North American audience. And some damsels in distress who needed to extend the length of their miniskirts. Sodom had his name changed to Katana. He is holding 2 swords, making his new name wholly appropriate. But I think it's funny that he's still named after a long pointy object that you can poke things with. Sometimes things slip past the censors though. Kid Icarus introduced kids to freaky blue boobs in its manual. And if you look closely at the sprite, those may just be bare breasts. Not to mention, there's actually bare boobs statues in the background. Obviously this game was too hard for the censors, they just couldn't make it to the final level. If you really want to see a naked butt, just take Alex to the sauna in River City Ransom. Rule number 2. No semblance of death, especially to cute animals. This rule might seem weird, since most video games are essentially about killing everything in your path until the end. But in Nintendo Land, nothing bleeds. Goombas just disappear into the ground. Perhaps they didn't even die. You're just planting them in the soil so that more will grow. Koopas, they just hide their shell until you leave. And Bowser certainly isn't killed by the lava. That's why he's always in the next castle. Any game where you're obviously inflicting bodily harm covers this up by completely eliminating blood. The most famous example is Mortal Kombat. In the Super Nintendo version, the blood was replaced by sweat and fatalities were replaced by finishing bonuses. Needless to say, the Super Nintendo version was not received well. It may have had better graphics than the Genesis version, but with all the gore missing, it was a commercial failure. This game is given credit for changing Nintendo's policy on blood in video games. But before that, we had many other instances of blood being replaced by strangely colored goo. Instead of visiting the bowels of hell, Simon Belmont is just playing in the sewer. Monster Party slipped by though, there's lots of blood in this game. But forget blood, even references to death were banned. In more text-heavy games, translators were forced to reword speeches so that words like kill, dead, or dying were more implied than directly said. See, Buzz isn't dying, he's just closing his eyes. There are also some pretty strict rules on who's allowed to be victim of violent behavior. The ice climbers hit seals in the Japanese version of the game, but snow monsters in the American version. Perhaps this has more to do with the proximity of the seal hunt controversy rather than acts of violence though. In Wolfenstein 3D, the Nazi dogs have been replaced by rabid rats. It's alright to kill rats, right? In SimAnt on the Super Nintendo, the scene where you share food was removed. I guess it was too gross. But the death scenes are still there. The poor ant gets eaten by the spider and ripped to shreds by other ants. I actually think the death scenes are a bit cooler on the Super Nintendo version. It must be okay to kill ants because they're reborn immediately afterwards. Finally, this rule has one annotation regarding domestic violence. Namely, there was to be none of it in American games.
Kill him.
The only game I know of with instances of this is Earthbound, where Poki's dad gives him a spank for losing his brother in the Japanese version, but he is just yelled at and grounded from dessert in the American version. Perhaps this is also the reason that poison was not included in the American version of Final Fight. Even if she is a transvestite, it does appear that you're punching a woman who just wants to practice some flips. Of course, if you can't punch Poison, I don't know why you can punch Linda. Rule 3. No references to actual religions, events, people, etc. This rule in particular could have been nothing more than an ass saver for Nintendo of America. With so many people ready and willing to sue about almost absolutely anything, they probably thought it keen to keep any type of symbol or reference to real-life events out of the games. It was an utmost priority to keep any religious symbols out of the games. In Final Fantasy VI, the magic spell Holy was renamed Pearl. It kinda looks like pearls anyway. Crosses were removed from games in beta versions and from fully complete Japanese versions. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past was actually supposed to be subtitled Triforce of the Gods, but Nintendo couldn't have the word God in a video game title. Except this one. Bionic Commando was originally named The Resurrection of Hitler Top Secret in Japan, but they managed to erase all Nazi symbols from the game for the North American version. The Nazis were renamed the Bads and Hitler became Master D. The censors must have been so focused on removing all the swastikas that they left in Master D's disgusting death scene. All Nazism was completely disposed of in Wolfenstein 3D as well. Instead of infiltrating a Nazi fortress, you're just fighting some random bad dudes. Hitler was once again renamed in this game as Statmeister. Keeping with Nintendo's dislike of referencing real-life events, perhaps the reason subsequent releases of Contra on the NES completely dropped the name Contra because of the Nicaraguan Contras. In this case, Super C is a much more safe name than Super Contra. Socks the Cat Rocks the Hill was a game that was never released. It was about Bill Clinton's cat who finds a nuke in the basement of the foreign embassy. Coincidentally, Kaneko USA shut down fairly close to its release date, and though the game was complete, it was never released. Rule 4. No immoral hijinks. This includes swearing, drinking, smoking, drugs, and anything else that could be thought of as shenanigans. Once again, a Final Fight character had to change his name and another had to tweak his line.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
In Mother 2, Lardna freaks out at Buzz, screaming, "A pesky toilet fly, die and go to hell!" While in Earthbound she instead says, "I think it's a dung beetle, I'll smash your guts out." That was really bad. She said die and hell. I kinda like the line change though. It's funny how the translator snuck in dung. And don't ask me why it's okay to smash someone's guts out when it's not so cool to suck someone's brains out. There are many instances of bars being renamed to something more palatable, and alcoholic drinks were often called something else, like juice. Now that looks like some pretty amazing juice. Nowadays we have rating systems to help guide people to video games of an appropriate age range for their children. Because video games aren't toys, even if they were marketed as such in the late 80s and early 90s. So I wish I could say that Nintendo no longer censors products. But there have been some more recent instances of censorship, though they are a lot less common. Metroid Prime 3, a Wii game, had a single word changed from its original release
They're targeting the planetary defense system.
to its release in Metroid Prime Trilogy.
No, they're targeting the planetary defense system.
Meanwhile, Call of Duty World at War had some Nazi references and dismemberment scenes removed from the game on the Wii version. So, over the passage of time, Nintendo's rules have become a fair less strict. But they're still making changes to games to make their consoles appear more family-friendly. But then we have Mad World. That's some pretty sick stuff. Happy gaming!